Years after the mission that cost him his closest K9, former Navy SEAL Caleb Rourke lived quietly on VA checks, cheap groceries, and a silence no one visited. Then one wet afternoon, he noticed two men standing too close to a young woman and the old German shepherd pressed against her side. A cardboard sign lay at her feet, $10 for sale. The dog didn't beg, he didn't bark. He only rose slowly, gray around the muzzle, and placed himself between the woman and the men. One of them laughed and stepped closer. Caleb set his grocery bag down. That's close enough. He thought he was only stopping two strangers from taking advantage of someone weaker. He was wrong. By the time the old dog looked at him, Caleb felt something in that stare he had spent years trying to forget. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today. We'd love to know how far this story travels. Caleb Rourke lived in Sandpoint, Idaho, in an aging apartment building pressed between the railroad tracks and the road that bent toward Lake Pend Oreille. Freight trains passed behind the building at odd hours, shaking the window glass with a tired metal rhythm. And most mornings he woke before the first horn anyway. At 39, he had the stillness of a man who had trained his body to waste no movement, even after life had taken away most of the places where that discipline belonged. Every month, one 735 defits landed in his account. By the third week, most of it was already gone. He kept a small notebook in the inside pocket of his jacket, its cover softened by rain, sweat, and years of being folded against his chest. The pages were filled with narrow handwriting, each line pressed hard into the paper as if the numbers might behave better if he wrote them firmly enough. Rent, power, phone, VA copay, groceries, gas, laundry. Sometimes he added the cents. Sometimes he circled what could wait. Nothing waited politely. Caleb had once been a Navy SEAL and a K9 handler, the kind of man who could read damp ground for a partial print, hear the shift in a dog's breathing before anyone else noticed danger, and hold a team steady when the world around them narrowed to dust and commands. He had worked beside dogs that understood silence better than most people understood speech, and one of them had stayed with him longer than memory should have allowed. The mission that took his closest K9 also took men whose voices still returned in pieces, never all at once, never when he was ready for them. After that, the military became a place behind glass. His body came home with enough scars to explain the paperwork, but not enough to explain the way he stopped answering calls, stopped unpacking boxes, stopped buying anything meant to last. He learned the routes between his apartment, the VA office, the discount store, and the lake road. He learned which cashier did not ask questions, which bench stayed dry after rain, and which days the pharmacy line moved slow enough to make his jaw ache. It was a life made of small systems. That afternoon, the rain had quit a little after 4, leaving the streets dark and glossy beneath a sky that looked rubbed thin. Caleb stepped out of the discount store with one brown paper bag tucked against his side, careful not to let the damp bottom sag too much. Inside were eggs, rice, canned beans, instant coffee, marked-down bread, and a small bottle of pain reliever he had stood in front of for nearly 2 minutes before choosing the cheaper brand. The cashier had told him to have a good one. Caleb had nodded like he knew how. Outside, the air smelled of wet cedar, lake water, and old asphalt warming after rain. A pickup rolled past with fishing rods rattling in the bed, and somewhere near the marina, a loose halyard knocked against a metal pole in a slow, hollow beat. The clouds were breaking over the far ridge, but the light coming through was pale and uncertain, the kind that made every puddle look deeper than it was. He shifted the grocery bag to his other hand and started walking. Sandpoint had a way of looking peaceful from a distance. The lake held the sky without complaint. The storefronts kept their painted signs bright for tourists, and the streets near the water carried that soft vacation town promise that everyone was supposed to feel better after arriving. Caleb knew better than to trust the face a town wore for strangers. Every place had its back rooms, its overdue bills, its people sleeping in cars behind buildings with cheerful window displays. He passed a coffee shop with chairs stacked outside, a closed kayak rental stand, and a narrow alley where rainwater ran along the curb in silver threads. A woman in a blue raincoat hurried across the street with takeout boxes under one arm. 2 teenagers coasted by on bikes, laughing too loudly, their tires hissing over the wet pavement. Caleb kept to the edge of the sidewalk. His apartment waited 3 blocks away with a sink full of dishes, a cold cup beside the stove, and a jacket thrown across the same chair where he had left it days earlier. He had meant to clean the place that morning before the benefits office opened. Then the phone bill came due, the pharmacy copay ran higher than expected, and the morning disappeared under the small math of survival. There were people who let a room get messy because they were careless. Caleb's room had become messy because no one was coming. He crossed near the park that sloped down toward the boat ramp, where damp grass clung to the soles of his boots and gulls walked across the empty picnic tables like bored inspectors. The benches still held beads of rain. The water beyond the docks moved in slow gray folds, stirred by a wind that carried the smell of boat fuel and pine bark. Near the path, a maintenance worker was loading trash bags into a utility cart. Farther down, an older couple stood under one umbrella, looking at the lake without speaking. Everything seemed ordinary enough to pass through without leaving a mark. Then Caleb heard laughter. It came from the lower edge of the park, near the fence that separated the walking path from the boat ramp. Not loud enough to alarm the couple under the umbrella, not sharp enough to draw someone from a storefront, but wrong in the way certain sounds were wrong before the mind caught up. It had a testing quality, the tone of men amusing themselves with someone who could not afford to answer back. Caleb slowed. For a moment he kept walking because the world was full of trouble, and he had learned long ago that a man could drown trying to step into all of it. The grocery bag creased softly in his hand. A train horn sounded far behind him, low and mournful, rolling over the wet roofs and vanishing toward the lake. The laughter came again. This time beneath it he heard a woman's voice, quiet, tight, trying not to shake. Caleb stopped. Caleb did not move at first. He stood near the wet path with the grocery bag hanging from one hand, watching the lower edge of the park where the laughter had come from. The sound had already faded, but the feeling of it remained in the air, thin and unpleasant, like smoke after a match. Near the fence by the boat ramp, a young woman sat beneath a dripping maple tree with her shoulders drawn inward and both hands wrapped around a leash. Beside her lay an old German shepherd. The dog was black and tan, though age had softened the colors around his face and turned his muzzle gray. He rested close to the woman's knee, not sprawled, not careless, but placed there with the deliberate stillness of an animal that had learned to watch before acting. Rain had darkened the fur along his back, and one ear twitched each time the two men shifted their weight. A piece of cardboard sat near the woman's boot, held down by a damp stone, $10 for sale. The letters were uneven, not from laziness but from a hand that had been cold too long. The woman was 28, maybe younger if life had been kinder, with brown hair tucked poorly beneath the hood of a faded green rain jacket. The sleeves were too short at the wrists, and the knees of her jeans were stained from damp grass. She kept her chin lifted, but Caleb could see the effort in it, the kind of pride that had been carrying more weight than it was built to carry. One of the men stood too close to the sign, reading it with a grin. "Well now," he said, drawing the words out, as if the park had become a stage and he had finally found an audience. $10. That include delivery, or is he too old to walk that far? The shorter man beside him laughed through his nose and leaned slightly toward the dog. "Maybe he catches squirrels," he said. "Could use him behind the shop." The woman pulled the leash closer without jerking it. The dog lifted his head but stayed quiet, his eyes moving from one man to the other. "He's not for you," she said. Her voice was soft. That seemed to bother the taller man more than anger would have. He had the narrow face of someone who enjoyed hearing himself sound reasonable while saying cruel things, and his hair was combed back despite the mist clinging to it. His friend was built lower and thicker, with a red face, work boots too clean for real work, and the restless energy of a man who often followed the worst idea in the room. "Not for us," the taller one asked. "Sign says for sale. It says $10," the other added. "Maybe we should negotiate down." The woman's fingers tightened around the leash. The old dog's shoulders rose by a fraction, not enough to threaten, just enough to change the air around him. Caleb started walking. He did not hurry. Hurrying made nervous people more nervous and reckless people louder. He came down the path with his boots dark from wet grass, the grocery bag brushing against his leg, his eyes fixed on the small space between the men and the woman. The taller man noticed him first and gave a quick glance, then looked away as if Caleb were just another passerby. The shorter one kept speaking. "You sitting here all afternoon making the place look bad," he said. "People come down here with kids, boats, nice cameras. They don't need a yard sale with fur." The woman looked past him toward the water, then back at the dog. Please leave us alone. It was not begging. It was a last attempt to keep the moment from becoming something larger. For a breath, it almost worked. The taller man shifted his feet, annoyed but uncertain, and the shorter one looked back at him as if waiting for permission to keep going. Then the old dog moved his front paws beneath him and rose. Slowly, his legs were stiff, but his body still remembered duty. He placed himself between the woman and the men, head low, eyes steady, a quiet line drawn in wet grass. The woman put one hand on his shoulder. "Bishop," she whispered. The dog held. The shorter man laughed again, but it came out thinner this time. "Look at that," he said. "Still thinks he's somebody." His hand drifted toward the leash, not quite touching it, close enough to test fear and claim innocence if anyone asked later. That was when Caleb stopped beside them. "Close enough," he said. The two men turned. The taller one looked Caleb over, from the old jacket to the cheap grocery bag, to the boots that had seen better years. His expression sharpened when Caleb did not look away. "This isn't your business," he said. Caleb set the grocery bag down on the path. The eggs shifted softly inside. "It is now." The shorter man opened his mouth, then closed it when Bishop's low growl rolled through the damp air. It was not wild or loud. It had control in it, and control carried farther than noise. Caleb glanced once at the woman, just long enough to see that she had not let go of the leash. Then he looked back at the men. "There's a camera on the marina office," he said. "Another one above the kayak rental. Park Patrol comes through here before 5, and if she asks you to step away again, this becomes harassment in a public place." The taller man smiled without warmth. "You a cop?" "No." "Then maybe keep walking." Caleb's face did not change. "You first." The wind moved across the park, stirring the leaves and sending a cold scatter of drops from the maple branches. A gull cried somewhere over the docks. Behind Caleb, a car passed slowly along the lake road, tires whispering through shallow water. The woman did not speak. Bishop stayed in front of her. The shorter man shifted his weight, trying to look amused. "Man buys discount eggs and thinks he runs the county." Caleb looked at him, not hard, not angry, just long enough. The shorter man found something very interesting near his own boots. The taller man understood the change before his friend did. Men like him often survived by knowing when a room had stopped belonging to them. He stepped back, brushed rain from his sleeve, and gave the woman one last look that tried to be a threat and settled for being small. "You're making friends with the wrong people," he told Caleb. Caleb bent slightly, picked up the damp cardboard sign, and held it so the ink would not smear worse. "Then explain that to someone who still wants to hear you talk." For a second, the shorter man seemed ready to answer. Instead, he turned too sharply, caught the edge of the wet cardboard with his heel, and skidded half a step toward a shallow puddle. He saved himself with both arms out, angry at the ground for embarrassing him. The taller man grabbed his sleeve and pulled him away. They walked toward the parking lot, one stiff with wounded pride, the other muttering under his breath about slippery parks and cheap signs. Neither of them looked back until they reached the far path. When they did, Bishop was still watching. The woman let out the breath she had been holding. Caleb lowered the cardboard sign and saw the words again. $10 for sale. The rain had blurred the dollar mark. He looked at the old German shepherd, then at the woman whose hand still rested on the dog's shoulder. "What's his name?" "Bishop," the woman said. The old German shepherd's ears shifted at the sound of his name, but his eyes stayed on the path where the two men had disappeared. He stood close to Marin's knee, rain darkening the fur along his back, his body tired but still arranged like a warning. Caleb kept a few feet between them and crouched slowly, not reaching, not smiling too quickly. "Good name," he said. Marin's hand rested on Bishop's collar. "My father chose it," he said. Bishop looked like he belonged in a church window, quietly judging everybody. For a second, something almost like a smile touched her mouth. Then it was gone. Caleb looked toward the parking lot. Dale and Mickey had reached a dark pickup, still talking with their shoulders tight and their pride dragging behind them like wet rope. They were far enough away to leave, close enough to remember. The afternoon had changed. Caleb picked up the damp cardboard sign from the grass. The ink had started to blur around the dollar mark, and the edge of the cardboard bent softly in his hand. "You trying to sell him?" he asked. Marin's face tightened. "No." The answer came too fast. She looked down at Bishop, ashamed of the word before she could explain it. I put the sign there, but I'm not selling him like that." Bishop lowered himself carefully onto the wet grass, his front legs folding slowly beneath him. He did not whine. He did not ask anyone to notice the effort. He simply settled beside Marin with the dignity of an old dog who hated making his weakness visible. "He's not sick," Marin said. "He's old." "I know," Caleb replied. That quiet answer made her look at him more closely. "My parents adopted him years ago," she said. "He'd been at a shelter almost a year. Nobody could really reach him. He didn't bite, didn't cause trouble. He just turned toward the wall whenever the metal doors closed." Bishop's eyes shifted at the word shelter. Marin brushed rain from the gray fur near his ear. "My mom sat with him 3 afternoons before he looked at her. She used to say, some dogs don't need pity. They need a house quiet enough to believe a door closing doesn't mean they've been left behind." Caleb stayed still. Some sentences deserved room. "I can't take him back there," Marin said. "They'd feed him. They'd try. I know that. But he already spent enough time being misunderstood by people who wanted him to act grateful on command. So the sign was for someone who might understand him." Her fingers tightened on the leash. "Someone with heat. A quiet place. Food he can chew. Someone who won't think he's broken because he doesn't rush toward strangers wagging his tail." The words held steady, but her hand did not. Caleb set the sign against the fence so it would not soak further. Then he glanced at his grocery bag sitting on the path, the damp paper sagging at one corner, the bread dented beneath the weight of canned beans. There was enough food in it for several careful meals if he stretched them the way he knew how. He looked back at Marin. "When did you last eat?" "I'm fine. That wasn't the question." She let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but empty. "Yesterday morning." Caleb did not react too sharply. Hunger was one of those things people hid because admitting it made the world feel too close. He had seen men deny pain with bones showing under their skin. "And Bishop?" "He ate," she said quickly. "I found some soft chicken behind the thrift store. It wasn't much, but it was clean." Caleb saw the crushed packet of crackers in her pocket, only crumbs left in the plastic. He saw the way Bishop swallowed once, slow and careful, as if wanting more would be rude. He did not make her explain it. "Where are you sleeping?" he asked. Marin looked toward the street, where the first lights were beginning to come on through the damp air. "Behind the church thrift store sometimes. There's an awning near the donation bins. A woman there knew my mother, and she used to leave water out when she could." "Used to?" "She went to Spokane. Her husband's getting treatments." Marin rubbed her thumb along the leash. "The new manager doesn't want people staying near the building. I understand. It isn't his job to fix my life." She said it fairly, and that made it sadder. The park was thinning out now. The older couple near the water turned back toward their car. The maintenance cart rattled away behind the restroom building, and the wind off the lake cooled the wet grass around them. Places like this looked harmless in daylight, but after dark they became a different country. Caleb glanced once toward the parking lot. The dark pickup was gone. Still, something about the way Dale had looked back stayed with him. Men like that did not always return because they were brave. Sometimes embarrassment did the driving. Caleb lifted his grocery bag. "I'm not buying him." Marin's eyes rose. "I have an apartment," he said. "Small, not pretty, but there's a lock, hot water, and enough space for you to sit where you can see the door." The word apartment put a wall behind her eyes. Caleb saw it and did not step closer. "You keep the key while you're there," he added. "You take the bed. I'll sleep by the door. If you want to leave, you leave. If you want me outside the room, I'll be outside the room." Marin stared at him. "Why?" Caleb looked at Bishop, lying in the wet grass with both eyes open. "Because he stood up for you when it hurt," he said, "and you still touched him first." Marin's mouth trembled once, then steadied. "I don't want charity." "Good," Caleb said. "I'm bad at making it look graceful." This time, the corner of her mouth moved for real, small and tired, but there. Bishop lifted his head and studied Caleb with the patient seriousness of an animal who had learned that people often revealed themselves in the pauses. The boat ramp light flickered on. Marin looked at the road, then at Bishop. Her hand moved over the old dog's muzzle, brushing rain from the gray hair there, and Caleb watched her make the kind of decision that did not feel like choosing so much as surrendering to what love required. "Only tonight," she said. Caleb nodded. "Only tonight." He handed her the cardboard sign. She held it against her chest for a moment, then folded it until the words disappeared inside. She followed because she was afraid. She followed because of Bishop. Caleb's apartment was on the second floor of an old brick building that smelled faintly of rain, dust, and somebody's fried onions from down the hall. The stairs creaked under Bishop's careful steps, and Marin kept one hand near his collar, watching the way his back legs worked a little harder near the top. Caleb reached the door first, unlocked it, then froze for half a second, as if the room beyond had just reminded him what kind of man lived there. "Sorry," he said. "It's a little messy." He stepped inside fast, trying to clear space with the urgent awkwardness of a man who had not expected a witness. He pulled a jacket off the back of a chair, gathered 2 envelopes and a folded utility bill from the table, snapped the lid onto a pill bottle beside a cold coffee mug, then nudged a crooked boot toward the wall and nearly dropped his keys doing it. Marin stood at the doorway with Bishop beside her. The room was small, low-ceilinged, and dim around the corners. A jacket had been hanging over the chair long enough to keep its shape. Dinner dishes still sat in the sink. The open pill bottle had left a pale ring beside the coffee mug. One boot faced the door while the other faced nowhere, and an old military storage bin rested beneath the table like something Caleb had moved across years and never opened all the way. It was not filthy. It was unattended. Marin saw that difference at once. The apartment had the look of a place where rent was paid on time. Floors were walked carefully, and nothing had been arranged for comfort because the person living there had stopped believing comfort would make much difference. Near the window, a folded cot leaned against the wall. Beside it sat a small stack of VA papers, a flashlight, and a radio with dust on the speaker. Caleb cleared his throat. "You can take the bed." Marin looked at the folded cot. "I can sleep on the floor." "No." He unfolded the cot, shook out a blanket, and set it near the warmest wall. "You take this. Bishop can lie wherever he wants, as long as he doesn't file a complaint with management." Bishop sniffed the floor once, then moved slowly toward the corner near the heater. Caleb opened a drawer, took out a spare key, and placed it on the table where Marin could see it. "That's yours while you're here. Bathroom's there. Back stairs are through that door by the laundry room. Manager's number is taped near the phone. Door locks from the inside without a key." Marin listened without interrupting. Every detail mattered. When Caleb pulled an old sleeping mat from behind the storage bin and unrolled it near the door, she frowned. "You don't have to do that." "Honestly, I like sleeping on the floor," he said, his face completely serious. "The Navy spent years teaching me that skill, and civilian life keeps denying me opportunities to practice." For the first time since the park, Marin almost smiled. Caleb saw it and wisely did not celebrate. He went to the kitchen instead, washed 2 bowls faster than neatly, then opened the grocery bag on the counter. Eggs, rice, canned beans, cheap bread, instant coffee, and the pain reliever rolled out in a small, honest inventory. Dinner came together without ceremony. Caleb cooked rice in a dented pot, warmed beans in a pan, scrambled 3 eggs, and tore bread into pieces on a plate because the knife in the drawer had gone missing under a towel. From a container in the back of the refrigerator, he took a small piece of cooked chicken he had planned to stretch into another meal, shredded it carefully, and placed it in a bowl with warm water for Bishop. Marin noticed. Caleb pretended she did not. Bishop ate slowly near the heater, his old jaw working with quiet care. He did not guard the bowl. He did not rush. He simply lowered his head and accepted the food, as if gratitude too needed dignity. At the table, Caleb pushed the fuller plate toward Marin and kept the smaller one for himself. His notebook lay open near his elbow, the latest page lined with expenses in tight handwriting. Rent, power, phone, VA copay, groceries, gas, laundry. Marin read only by accident, then looked away quickly, but the numbers had already told her enough. Kindness was quieter than she expected. For a while they ate with only the heater clicking and Bishop breathing near the wall. Outside, a car hissed through wet pavement. Somewhere beyond the building, the train gave a distant horn that seemed to move through Caleb before it moved through the window. Marin set her fork down. "My father died when I was 12. Caleb looked up but said nothing. "My mother raised me and my brother after that. She worked at a dry cleaner in town, then cleaned rooms on weekends when the summer people came in." Marin rubbed her thumb along the edge of the plate. "Evan helped when he could. He was my older brother. Joined the army after high school." Caleb's face changed only slightly at the name of service. "He died overseas," she said. "My mom never talked about it much, but every Thanksgiving she still set out 1 extra plate." Said habits were allowed to be stronger than grief. The room held that sentence carefully. Marin took a breath. After she got sick, everything came fast. Hospital bills, late property tax, letters about repairs. Then people started calling about the house. The house by the lake, Caleb asked. She nodded. It's old, small, but it sits close enough to the water that local real estate people kept saying it had potential. Vacation rental potential mostly. Caleb listened with his hands still around his cup. They sent code notices about the porch, the back steps, the paint. Then a property services company offered to handle repairs if we agreed to talk about a sale. My mom refused while she could. Marin's voice thinned but did not break. When she was in the hospital, I signed things I thought were temporary. Authorization forms, permission for estimates, copies for county review. I don't even know anymore. You were alone? She nodded once. After she died, the bills didn't stop. People kept saying the smart thing was to let the house go before it swallowed me too. She looked toward Bishop. Then Bishop got harder to feed, and I got easier to scare. Caleb did not tell her it would be all right. The words would have been too cheap in that room, over that meal. Do you still have the paperwork? He asked. Some of it, envelopes, copies, hospital bills, county letters. She gave a tired, embarrassed shrug. I kept things because my mother kept everything. I didn't know that might matter. It might. That was all he gave her. For a little while, the room seemed to settle around them, as if a poor meal, a locked door, and an old dog breathing by the heater could hold back more than the rain. Marin's shoulders lowered. Caleb rinsed the bowls, badly but sincerely, and Bishop followed him with his eyes like a supervisor unimpressed by technique. Peace came in small portions. Night slipped in slowly. Marin fell asleep on the cot with one hand near the blanket's edge. Bishop lay between the cot and the door, close enough to both of them to claim responsibility. Caleb stretched out on the sleeping mat, boots beside him, jacket folded under his head, one arm across his chest. Somewhere deep in the building, a pipe knocked. Caleb's breath changed. At first, it was only uneven. Then his hand tightened around the edge of the mat, his shoulders locked, and his eyes opened wide without seeing the apartment. No explosion filled the room. No fire lit the walls. Only his body remembered what the night had not brought with it. Bishop lifted his head. The old dog rose carefully, joint slow but purpose clear, and walked to Caleb without barking. He sat near him, close enough for Caleb to feel the warmth of him, far enough not to crowd. Then Bishop lowered his head and began to breathe in a slow, steady rhythm. In, out. Caleb's eyes found the movement. His fingers loosened by degrees. The room returned in pieces: heater, window, rain, dog. Marin woke on the cot and pushed herself up on one elbow. She did not rush across the room. She did not ask what had happened. She only watched Bishop sit there in the dark, patient as a stone placed in a river. He does better, she whispered, when people don't rush him. Morning came gray and quiet, with rain still ticking against the fire escape outside Caleb's window. Marin was already awake when Caleb opened his eyes. She sat on the edge of the cot with her hair loose around her face, one hand resting lightly on Bishop's back, watching the old dog breathe near the heater. She did not ask about the night before, and Caleb was grateful in a way he could not have explained without making the room smaller. Bishop lifted his head when Caleb moved. "Morning," Caleb said, rough-voiced. Marin nodded. Morning. Nothing else needed to be said. Over the next stretch of days, Caleb's apartment began to collect sounds that did not belong to his old life. Water ran in the sink while Marin washed bowls before he could get to them. Bishop sighed under the table with the deep, tired patience of a dog who had decided the floor was acceptable. A towel Caleb would have left on the chair somehow appeared folded near the stove. Caleb noticed all of it. He did not make a speech about it. He bought another small bag of rice, replaced the kitchen bulb that had been flickering for weeks, and moved the military storage bin farther under the table so Marin would stop bumping her shin on it. When she thanked him, he usually answered with a nod or said something practical about needing light to see whether the eggs were burning. That was easier. The apartment still looked like a place trying to remember how to welcome people, but the corners had begun to loosen. The cold coffee mug was washed. The envelopes on the table were stacked instead of scattered. Caleb still left one boot pointing nowhere, though Bishop seemed to take personal offense at it and nudged it with his nose until it faced the door. Marin laughed the first time he did it. The sound surprised them both. In the afternoons, when the rain thinned and the sidewalk dried in patches, Caleb took Marin and Bishop behind the building near the service alley. He did not call it training. He only said there were a few things every person should know, especially a person who had learned to make herself smaller around trouble. Don't square up unless you have to, he told her. Turn your shoulder. Keep one foot back. Give yourself somewhere to go. Maren tried it, stiff at first, her body apologizing before her mouth could. Caleb adjusted her stance without touching unless she nodded first. He taught her to step out of reach, to keep her hands visible without surrendering space, to use her voice like a door closing. Clear words, he said. No explaining. No arguing with someone who wants you busy explaining. She looked embarrassed. I say sorry too much. I noticed. That obvious? Only to people who listen for exits. Bishop watched from the shade of the stairwell, ears moving at every sound. Caleb showed Maren how to let him stand near her left side, close enough to guard, far enough that she could still move. Bishop obeyed the quiet hand signals better than Caleb expected, though sometimes he sat down early and looked at both of them as if the lesson could have been handled with less human foolishness. Caleb found himself smiling once. He stopped when he realized it. For a while, the apartment seemed to be learning a gentler rhythm. Then one evening, Maren opened the cloth bag she kept beside the cot and took out a photograph with bent corners. She laid it on the table carefully, as if setting down something alive. Caleb was rinsing a pan in the sink. He glanced over once, then turned off the water. The photograph showed a small house near the lake, white paint weathered by sun and storm, a porch rail patched in 2 different colors, and a line of trees behind it. Maren stood younger in the picture, thinner in the face but smiling with more ease than Caleb had seen in her. Beside her was a woman with tired eyes and strong hands. On the other side stood a young man in army uniform, shoulders straight, grin crooked, one hand resting near Bishop's head. Bishop was younger then. His muzzle had no gray. His chest looked fuller. He lay at their feet like he had been placed there by oath rather than habit. "That's my mom," Maren said. And Evan Caleb dried his hands on a towel that had actually been folded. He stepped closer, but did not pick up the photo. Evan Whitlock looked different from the kind of soldier Caleb expected to remember. In the family picture, his face was open, almost shy, softened by the presence of people who knew him before rank and dust and distance. The uniform made him look proud, but the hand near Bishop's head made him look careful. Caleb stared a second too long. Maren noticed. "What? I don't know." Her fingers moved over the edge of the picture. "You recognize him?" Maybe Caleb's voice lowered, or maybe I recognize the type. Maren looked down at Evan. He was good with animals. People too, when they gave him half a chance. Mom said he could calm a room just by pretending he wasn't trying. Bishop shifted under the table. Caleb's throat tightened with a memory that had no full shape yet. A hot training yard. Sand stuck to sweat. Helicopter noise chewing through the air. A young soldier crouched beside a nervous dog, waiting longer than everyone else because waiting was what the dog needed. It was there, then gone. He did not chase it in front of her. Later, after Maren had fallen asleep and Bishop had settled near the cot, Caleb sat at the table with the photograph still in his mind. The apartment was dark except for the small lamp by the sink. Rain moved softly against the glass. The military storage bin waited under the table. Caleb looked at it for a long time. Then he pulled it out. Dust came up when he opened the lid. Inside were things he had moved from place to place without sorting. A rolled patch, old field notebooks, a cracked watch, dog tags that were not his, and envelopes of photographs with dates written in fading marker. He worked slowly, because some boxes did not open only from the outside. Near the bottom, he found an envelope marked Virginia Beach. His hands paused. He opened it anyway. The photographs were sun-faded and curled at the edges. Men stood in lines near a sand-colored training fence, some smiling, some squinting, some already half-turned away from the camera. Dogs sat at their handlers' feet or pulled towards something out of frame. Caleb found himself younger among them, leaner, sharper, one hand resting on the harness of the K9 he still avoided naming when sleep was near. Then he saw Evan. Back row, left side, darker from sun, thinner through the cheeks, dust on one shoulder of his uniform. One hand was held low near the collar of a dog Caleb remembered only because the animal had trembled every time a helicopter passed overhead. Evan had not pulled the dog close. He had stayed beside him, loose-handed, patient, waiting for fear to spend itself. Caleb sat very still. He did not remember a conversation. He remembered a posture. He remembered the rare decency of a man who knew strength did not always need to move first. By morning, the 2 photographs lay side by side on the table. Maren found them when she came into the kitchen barefoot, Bishop following slowly behind her. She stopped before she reached the chair. For a moment she only looked. In one picture, Evan stood by the lake with his family and a young bishop at his feet. In the other, he stood in the back row of men Caleb had once passed through like weather. Darker, leaner, one hand lowered toward a frightened dog. Marin touched her brother's face with the tip of her finger. Bishop lay down beneath the table, eyes half open, as if some old thread had finally been pulled close enough for everyone in the room to feel it. The first sign came from Bishop. He had been lying beneath the table while rain tapped softly against the window, his gray muzzle resting between his paws, one ear twitching now and then at the building's ordinary night sounds. Caleb was asleep on the floor mat near the door, Marin on the cot by the wall, and the apartment had settled into that fragile, quiet people only notice after too many nights without it. Then Bishop raised his head. His body went still before the sound reached anyone else. The old dog's ears lifted, his shoulders tightened, and a low growl moved in his throat, quiet enough to belong to the dark, but steady enough to wake Caleb at once. Caleb opened his eyes. He did not sit up fast. He turned his head, listened, and heard it. A shoe stopping outside the door, then another, then the faint scrape of metal near the lock. "Marin," he whispered. She woke with a sharp breath, but Caleb had already lifted one hand, palm down, telling her to stay low. He pointed toward the kitchen corner, then reached beneath the table and pulled out the coil of paracord he had used earlier to tie shut the old military bin. His movements were small, practiced, and almost silent. For a few seconds, the apartment held its breath with them. The lock trembled again. Caleb looped the cord low behind the door and hooked it around the leg of a heavy shelf near the entry. It was not a trap built for harm, only enough to steal balance from someone rushing in where he did not belong. He looked once at Bishop, then gave a short hand signal. "Wait." Bishop waited. The door pushed inward. Mickey came first, shoulder leading, mouth already shaped around some foolish whisper. Bishop exploded forward with a hard bark and stopped at the threshold, teeth flashing near empty air but never closing on skin. Mickey yelped anyway, jerking back so fast his boot caught the low cord. He went down into the hallway laundry bin with a crash that woke half the floor. Plastic lids scattered. A bottle of detergent rolled under the railing. Mickey grabbed his knee and cursed in a voice that tried to sound angry, but came out wounded and ridiculous. Dale stood behind him, rain shining on his jacket, face tightening as the situation slipped out from under him. Marin hit the hallway switch. Light flooded the narrow corridor. She stood behind Caleb with her phone raised in both hands. Her face was pale, her voice shook once, but the words came clear. "I know your names. I know who sent you, and I'm recording." Dale looked from her to Caleb, then to Bishop, who stood in front of them with his head low, and his bark still trembling in the walls. Behind Dale, a door opened, then another. A gray-haired man in a bathrobe leaned into the hallway, holding a baseball cap as if he had grabbed the first weapon dignity allowed. Caleb stepped out far enough for Dale to understand the distance had changed. "You walk out now," Caleb said, "or the police hear about the park. This door, her phone, the hallway camera, and every neighbor currently enjoying your performance." Mickey tried to stand, slipped on the detergent bottle, and sat back down hard. The bathrobe neighbor winced. That looked personal. Dale's jaw flexed. He wanted to say something sharp enough to repair the scene, but there was no sentence strong enough for a man fleeing an old dog, a phone camera, and a laundry bin. He hauled Mickey up by the jacket and dragged him toward the stairs. Mickey limped after him, blaming the floor, the light, the dog, and briefly the state of American apartment maintenance. Dale looked back once. Caleb did not move. When the stairwell door slammed below, the hallway seemed larger than before. Marin lowered the phone slowly. Bishop gave one final bark toward the stairs, then looked up at Caleb as if asking whether the lesson had been satisfactory. Something white lay near the laundry bin. Caleb bent and picked it up. It was a folded work order, damp at the edges, stamped with a company name Marin recognized before Caleb read it aloud. North Shore Property Services, Whitlock Residence, interior clearing scheduled before buyer walkthrough. Do not contact county office until transfer clears. Marin stared at the paper. The threat had left something behind. By morning, the work order sat beside Marin's hospital bills, county letters, code notices, and the copies Caleb had asked her to gather. The papers did not solve everything, but they changed the shape of the problem. Before, Marin had only felt cornered. Now there was a timeline, a company name, a scheduled clearing, and a phrase that made Caleb's eyes narrow. Do not contact county office until transfer clears. Caleb took her first to the county recorder, where a clerk with silver glasses pulled public records and frowned longer than politeness required. Then they met a veteran service officer Caleb knew from his own VA paperwork, a patient man named Ron Maddox, who had learned that half of helping people meant sitting beside them while forms tried to scare them away. Ron made 2 calls. By noon, Marin had an appointment with legal aid. The truth did not arrive with sirens. It came in copies, dates, signatures, and quiet questions asked by a housing attorney who read every page twice. The authorization Marin signed had been written broadly enough to be abused. The transfer paperwork had not fully cleared. The company had scheduled an interior clearing before ownership was settled, and Dale and Mickey were listed as subcontracted help under the same property services firm. Marin sat very still while the attorney explained it. Caleb sat beside her, hands folded. Bishop slept under the table with the calm confidence of someone who had already done his part. The transaction was paused. North Shore Property Services withdrew the clearing order. A formal complaint went into the county file, and the attorney sent letters that made 3 different offices suddenly remember procedure. Dale and Mickey became names in a report instead of shadows at the edge of Marin's life. No one called it victory at first. Marin only cried when the attorney said she could enter the house again. The Whitlock place stood to the lake with tall grass around the path and rain stains under the porch roof. The front steps sagged on one side, the paint had lifted from the rail, and the living room smelled of closed windows, old wood, and a family interrupted mid-sentence. Marin stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. Then she hung the family photograph back on the wall. Caleb repaired the first porch step before anything else. He worked without ceremony, sleeves pushed up, a pencil behind one ear, his old focus returning in a quieter form. Bishop lay in the shade beside the toolbox, lifting his head whenever Caleb measured wrong, which happened enough that Marin accused the dog of supervising with military authority. The house changed by inches. A bedroom became clean enough for guests. The porch light worked again. The kitchen curtains came down, washed, and went back up smelling faintly of soap and lake wind. Marin kept the house instead of selling it, renting a few rooms on quiet weekends to families who wanted the water without the noise, using the income to pay down bills and repair what grief had left waiting. Some days each month, she saved the place for veterans who needed silence more than scenery. Caleb stayed through the repairs, then through the first guest booking, then through the morning. Marin painted a small wooden sign under the porch roof. Whitlock House, quiet stays by the lake. The wind moved across the water, carrying the smell of pine and rain-warmed boards. Bishop settled between them on the porch, gray muzzle lifted toward the light, while Marin stood with one hand on the rail her mother had once painted. There was no cardboard sign by the road anymore. What I keep thinking about is that old cardboard sign. $10 for a dog who had already given a family years of loyalty. It sounds small, almost ordinary, until you realize Marin was not trying to get rid of Bishop. She was trying to love him in the only way she had left. The people in this story were made for this telling, but the weight they carry is familiar. A messy apartment, a hospital bill, a veteran waking in the dark, a house that holds more memory than money. Those things belong to real life, and many people understand them without needing much explanation. I like to believe grace sometimes arrives quietly, without announcing itself. Maybe it comes through a spare key on a table, an old dog breathing beside a frightened man, or someone fixing one porch step before asking what comes next. May God bless the tired hearts still trying to do right with what little they have. If any part of this story brought back a memory, a prayer, or someone you still miss, you're welcome to share it in the comments. And if these grounded human stories matter to you, a like and subscribe helps keep them going. Some doors close hard, others open slowly, with a dog waiting on the porch.